Before the show begins, adjust your sound and focus. My voice should be easily heard in all parts of the room. Beep and flash should synchronize. If they do not, recheck the threading directions on your projector.
At the time of writing, the 50th anniversary of the announcement of the IBM System 360, also known as the Mainframe, has come and gone. By now, anyone who's been even tangentially involved with this beast is familiar with the number of times it's been written off. Most notably in 1991, when the prediction was made that the last mainframe would be switched off in 1996. Of course, that never happened. There have been notable losses, including one site dear to my heart, but the mainframe has one thing in common with Mark Twain. Rumours of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Indeed, since Linux has become available on the platform, Mainframe has shaken off its legacy badge, how I loathe that term, and is at the leading edge of innovation. Although 1981 was the first time I ever got to touch a mainframe, it was a few years earlier that I was first exposed to the technology. I had started my high school's basketball program when I was in Year 9, and as part of getting off the ground, I scrounged for equipment and supplies wherever I could. One lunchtime I was given the okay to go into the sports storeroom, whereupon I came across a box full of manuals and correspondence. Included in this collection were self-study manuals for assembler and COBOL. Over the next couple of years I worked through these manuals and, with the help of both COBOL and assembler coding sheets, wrote several programs before I'd even seen a System 360. In fact, I spent so much time with this material that it ate into my senior year and perhaps caused me to fall 5 points short of doing medicine instead of computer science. I have a feeling those manuals might have been planted for me to find, thus saving several malpractice and wrongful death suits. I started with my first mainframe in 1981, when I received a cadetship at the New South Wales Totalisator Agency Board, more commonly called the TAB, which had set up a computer science cadetship scheme where high school graduates would continue to work part-time and do university part-time for 2 years before doing their final 2 years of a computer science degree full-time. This is a wonderful scheme, the brainchild of its former CEO, the late Alan Windross. As part of the cadetship, I was required to work all 3 shifts in the computer room for 3 months during my first year. In those days, the shifts were 3 by 8 hours starting at 8 a.m., 4 p.m. and midnight. Consequently, I was able to work with a variety of equipment. The New South Wales TAB was established in 1964 as a statutory authority of the New South Wales Government to provide off-course parimutuel or totalisator betting services to the adult population of the state. Initially, cash offices and account-based operations were manual. The TAB's popularity made it evident that remaining a manual operation was not going to be an option for very long, and that automation was going to figure heavily in the future of the organisation. Automation was required to provide point-of-sales outlets throughout the state, as well as a call centre account-based operation. Wagering is a completely discretionary activity. If I was going to place a bet on race 4, but I miss out, then I may not opt to spend the money on another race. I may use those funds on another pastime, such as going to the movies, etc. Therefore, downtime is a major enemy. This system must always be available to compete for leisure funds. Bets are transactions, and thus any system must be transaction-based and provide for real-time collation of bets, logging for auditing, and reporting of the income and dispersal of winnings. The TAB's answer to these requirements was to partner with IBM to provide dual System 360 Model 44 based systems running a homegrown Kix-like online transaction program. The TAB's adoption of System 360 as the core of its operations came only a few years after IBM's decision to put its own business on the line. By this time the success of System 360 had been assured and the TAB was on a sound footing using this technology. The 360-44s were grand beasts, complete with flashing light front panel and golf ball typewriter console. They were required in 1971. Each processor had 128K of memory and operated in either dual mode or master-slave mode. Early on, the storage of these boxes was extended to 256K each. The software used the IBM assembly language and eventually ran a specially customized version of DOS Release 19. Programmers had to get special permission to use storage instructions, as these were emulated on the 44. In addition to the processors, the configuration included 4 IBM 3967 telecommunications processors, which I think were special-purpose System 360 Model 40 processors, but I could be wrong. In any event, they had that remarkable truss technology inside. 12 IBM 3970 telecommunications adapters, 5 IBM 2314 disk drives for each central processor. A novel feature of the 2314 was that the addressing could be changed by moving magnetic plugs on the front of the drive. Opening all the drawers in the device simultaneously was not recommended, as it could cause the entire device to tilt at a disturbing angle. Each processor had a 2415 magnetic tape drive. The noise from the vacuum when this device was loading was something to be experienced. There was one IBM 1403N1 and one IBM 1443N1 printer, shared via a 2914 switch. I'll speak more on the 1403 and 1443 later. There was a 2501 card reader for each processor, a 1442 card punch, again shared via the 2914. Each processor had one IBM 2848 visual display unit controllers supporting 6 2260 VDUs. There were two 1053 golf ball typewriters and a Model 29 card punch. The 44s were fun to operate. Front of panel lights always made you feel like there was real work being done. There was nothing quite like dialing up the IP device address, hitting stop, reset, load, and watching it spring into life. It was especially fun to boot from a card reader where the noise of the cardboard moving through its various stations heightened the experience. It's interesting that after 40 years, the reasons Tab chose IBM are still as valid today for all enterprises. Reliability, availability, and serviceability were key to doing and growing the business. A high level of performance was required to serve a geographically large state with hundreds of terminals. IBM had helped to write the code, both operating system and application. This required a strong partnership and skilled resources. For the Tab to grow, backward compatibility was very important. A rewrite of the system each time equipment was upgraded was out of the question. In order to keep ahead of the competition, the technology needed to be cutting edge and continually being refined and expanded. In 1972, OLTPs such as Airline Control Program, KICS, and IMS were maturing, but batch still ruled. Today, the System Z's ability to support mobile technologies through web services and products like WorkLight and its role in big data operations through technologies such as Hadoop keep it relevant and central to many enterprises' operations. From its roots in the 36030, System Z now boasts of technologies such as capacity on demand, which enables flexibility to meet the day-to-day operations of businesses. It boasts of virtualization through Prism and ZVM, which maximize the utilization of resources. And note how much of the real estate on a System Z chip is devoted to the needs of getting the work of business done efficiently. Tab, like many IBM installations, exploited the improvements in technology to grow its business. Over decades, the underlying technology changed, but its basic requirements remained the same. The upward compatibility of processors and peripherals meant that these needs could be met while exploiting the improvements to increase productivity. By 1985, the 36044s were retired. The front panel of one was salvaged, but the rest and all the peripherals were unceremoniously dumped on the back of a truck that was 60 centimeters lower than the loading dock. There was so much gold in those boxes that they were destined for the smelters instead of a museum. During the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the Tab acquired System 370 135s, 148s, a couple of 3031s, numerous 4341s and 4381s, before eventually getting 3090 processors that enabled the growing business from just a couple of $100 million a year to the $1 billion mark. By the time I left in 1999, we had moved on to 9672s and were on the verge of acquiring a Z800. By this time, Tab turnover had exceeded $4 billion for a state with a population of between 4 and 5 million, which says a lot about the strain and propensity to gamble. One of my favourite memories from this time was when we commissioned one of our 3090 boxes located at our disaster recovery site. This computer room had been sized so that two fully configured 3090-600 complexes, strings of 3380s and 3420 tape drives could fit into the space. Well, disks got smaller and the 3420s made way for the 3480s, and we initially installed only a 3090 150E, meaning that there was room to spare, enough for an indoor soccer or cricket pitch. On this occasion, my wife, who was expecting our second child, was with friends, so I had charge of our 18-month-old daughter, Kate. I had to set up and initiate the IOCDS of our Brown system. We color-coded all our systems in those days, so I had to take Kate with me. I sat down at the console and did some work before noticing she was no longer with me. A quick search of the complex yielded nothing, but a closer inspection revealed that the door of the cabinet housing the bus and tag cables was unlatched and slightly ajar. I opened the door and found her hiding in that cabinet. She was quite pleased with herself at finding such a clever hiding spot. No mention of this was made to occupational health and safety, nor to my wife until a sufficient amount of time had passed. Display technology has probably been the most obvious element of change outside the computer room. From the 2260 with its awkward key sequences, to the clunky 3277, to the heights of function and style in the 3278, still my favourite, the raster and vector graphics of the 3279, G3 and its descendants, to emulators, and now to fully GUIfied applications. This technology is probably only second to processors when it comes to reduction in space requirements. However, with that reduction has become the sterility of design. No longer can you see things spin, move data from one device to another, nor change addressing by switching plugs. This is a hollow lament, as the advances have greatly outweighed the losses. Printers are generally pretty boring creatures. However, the 1443 printer, shown in the middle, was sometimes a real pain in the ass. Night shift in the computer room was usually a fun time to work. The afternoon shift would be responsible for shutting down the online systems and would hand over to the night shift to perform the offline processing. Most of the time, offline processing was finished by 4 AM, so as a junior member of the team, I would often be able to go home rather than stay until the next shift started. Often we'd start the offline jobs and head out to Pancakes on the Rocks for a very early breakfast and then watch the sun rise over Sydney Harbour and the Opera House. Spectacular. How I wish we had cell phones with cameras then. Instagram would be overflowing with such pictures. The only fly in the ointment was the weekly, or was it monthly, credit union statement printing jobs. For some reason, the output was directed to the 1443 rather than to the infinitely more reliable 1403. The 1443 in operation was a sight to behold. You could watch the hammers rise and fall as they impacted the ribbon as the sliding rail of characters moved back and forth, and be amazed that they didn't get caught up with each other. Unfortunately, sometimes they did, and usually we were in our second batch of pancakes. Many times we'd return and the printer hammers had become stuck. There was no going home early on those days. Talking to others who were involved in computing during this era, it became apparent there was another non-standard activity in which operators engaged. Placing a radio atop a 1403 and then sending print jobs to the device would result in theremin-like sounds emanating from the speaker. It became a game to see if you could get it to play a somewhat recognizable tune. Tab were relatively early adopters of VM370. First acquired in 1974, the black sheep of IBM quickly became an integral part of day-to-day operations. As with the processors, we grew our business and VM helped us with that growth. It formed the basis of our disaster recovery plans and facilitated centralized system and network operations. We were also an early adopter of SQLDS, not long after it was internally known as System R. Our betting systems provided the raw information that formed the basis of our management information systems. We even wrote an online credit union system using it and Rex. ZVM remains the gold standard of virtualization technology. Without its ability to manage tens to hundreds of guests, the ability to consolidate servers using Linux would not have been possible. From its 24-bit days of VM370, we now have a 64-bit exploiting operating system capable of managing a terabyte of memory and dispatching work on up to 32 processors. Despite some within IBM who have attempted to kill it over the last 4 decades or so, ZVM is a key technology in maintaining the success of the mainframe. To continue that success, it needs to care and feeding by management, and not just a cost center on some bean counters journal that can be squeezed dry in pursuit of short-term profitability. Despite the underlying reliability of the hardware and the robustness of the operating systems, code is not perfect, especially not application code. When things go wrong, it's nice to have the tools and technology to help you recover quickly. One such occasion where the imperfections of the application manifested itself happened on the worst day possible. Our System 390 hardware on our VSE and VM operating systems helped us through the problem, but it was a painful time for all involved. For those viewers outside Australia, Melbourne Cup Day, which occurs on the first Tuesday in November, is an event that really does stop the nation. Just after 3 p.m, a 3,200-metre race is run. During the lead-up to the race, hundreds of millions of dollars are waged. Our systems would take a pounding, but would make it through the ordeal with a great aplomb. Unfortunately, in 1991, this was not to be the case. A long-standing but undiscovered bug in the cachebet system revealed itself 15 minutes before race start time, taking down half of the state of New South Wales betting outlets. I had spent my day, as normal, collecting 1-minute statistics from our RTM-SF system, also known as SMART. In the old days, we'd go down to the computer room and watch the select light on the 3420 to see how rapidly data was being logged. On this day, the figures were coming in as expected. However, when the bug revealed itself, I watched as processor utilization fell through the floor. There's nothing to compare with the feeling of the pit of the stomach as a realization hits you that several $1 million have just been lost. The next 24 to 48 hours were a blur as follow-on effects were felt. It was a miserable time. I even made the evening news as background material. My boss, Peter Turner, and I pointed to some GDDM PGF graphs I'd called up on a 3270 Mod 3 while the CEO spoke to the cameras in front of us. The only upside was that I and one of my co-workers, Brooke Matthews, were rewarded for our efforts at recovery by becoming part of the crew of Kookaburra 3 on Sydney Harbour, with the ultimately unsuccessful Australia America's Krupp crew. This boat had lost to the Stars and Stripes in 1987. We learned many lessons from that failure, and the technology available at the time helped us to react better in the future. We're a big S&A shop, but each VSE system owned its own resources, meaning multiple points of control. So we used Netmaster on VM with VMVTAM to make it the control point for our entire network, which helped us to improve management and recovery. Despite its clunkiness, I liked working with VTAM and even genning NCPs, especially doing things with NIPSI. That technology helped us open a lot of doors and extend the reach of the business. I can't help but recall a great joke that was going around in the late 80s about SNA. A call is received at IBM HQ and is directed to the then head, John Akers. Caller: John Akers? Akers: Yes. John Akers, IBM CEO? Yes. John Akers, IBM CEO, White Plains? Yes. Starting to get agitated. John Akers, IBM CEO, White Plains, New York? Yes. What do you want? Just wanted to let you know how it felt to set up an S&A session. TCP/IP was the next big technology to be introduced to TAB. I had visited the Varians at Princeton University who had been in the TCP/IP game for some time. They explained what was being done with the technology and introduced me to Gopher, which was being used for document sharing. They also referred to the World Wide Web. It didn't mean a lot to me initially, but on my return to Sydney I began to investigate. Within a few months we had our first dial-up connection and domain name. Mosaic was soon available to us, and we began developing prototypes that exploited the wealth of wagering data that had been accumulated in our SQLDS databases. By 1995, the mainframe was connected to the net. It took some time to get firewalls in place, so our initial read-only service to the public was data created on a VM system and transferred to an external host. From its initial brutal website design, the TAB's internet presence boomed, culminating in the first online bet being sold in March of 1997. Within a few years, the SNA network that covered the state of New South Wales and our call centre networks had been replaced with TCP/IP. Independently of IBM, I, along with Linus Vepstus, Rick Troth, Rob Vanderheij and others, began working on a port of Linux to the mainframe. This had been enabled by a port of GCC that produced System 390 code. We gave it the name of Bigfoot and made considerable progress in a relatively short time. In 1999, I co-authored a Red Book on VM Open Edition in Poughkeepsie. During that time, Boas Betzler, who had led the Skunkworks project in Birmingham under the direction of distinguished engineer Karl-Heinz Strassmeyer, was in town to talk to the Software Council. I was able to have a private meeting with him where he showed me the great progress that had been made, even to the point of running Apache. There were some who were hopeful that I might even be able to return to Australia with some code. However, I think they underestimated IBM Legal and the bureaucracy. Upon returning to Australia, I was witness to some of the email traffic where the blood and other bodily parts of those involved in the heresy were being called for. Fortunately, smarter heads prevailed, and the code did make it to the public. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to find anyone with an IBM who thought Linux on Z was a bad idea. I didn't abandon the Bigfoot port, but did use it to try and support the Birmingham folks by regularly publishing our progress in an attempt to show IBM that if they didn't do it, someone else would. The hope was that this pressure, albeit fairly small, would assist those within IBM in developing a business case. Another side effect was that we had fun doing so. The code finally made it out the door on December 18, 1999, with the birth of the Morris distribution and the mods to the kernel, GCC and glibc. By this time I had moved to the US and was working for Sterling Software. Being a large VM shop, it didn't take too long before we had a working instance of Linux running on our 9672. I think I may have been responsible for one of the first non-IBM patches of the kernel when it was discovered that the compare, swap and purge instruction was not available on our 9672, and a method using sigp had to be implemented to achieve the same outcome. That being said, it was clear that the amount of code to support System 390 was minuscule, and that Linux really was Linux. In just over 15 years, the landscape had been transformed. Who could have imagined? These next two slides summarize the virtues of Linux on System Z and are offered without comment. So where to now for System Z and Linux? The folks at Veristorm have developed a packaging of Hadoop tailored for the System Z with its inclusion of a ZOS adapter that enables seamless access to data. In terms of cloud, something that VM has been doing for years, but like the old saying goes, everything old is new again, IBM's support of OpenStack is significant by enabling System Z to play in the same league as the other platforms. CA's AppLogic and cloud storage products enable increased productivity, and Velocity's ZVPS provides a sophisticated provisioning and management toolset. For mobile, through the use of web services, the services and data of the mainframe are extended to smartphones and tablets. Linux's proximity to the data source provides significant advantages in terms of access and security. These smartphone screenshots show how it's possible to extend systems administration from the 3270. Once derided for its command line interface, the simplicity of this mechanism is easily exploited by web services to initiate operations on the mainframe and have the results returned to the mobile user. So yes, the rumours of the mainframe's death have been greatly exaggerated, and it was very sporting of Stuart Alsop to publicly eat his words. I think it is fair to say that IBM has over-delivered on its vision for System 360. I doubt even the most optimistic could have foreseen where we have got to so far. Indeed, several years later, engineers like Gene Armdale reflected that some of the design decisions were too conservative. For example, 24-bit addressing caused a great deal of pain to overcome. However, the design was such that obstacles like this could be overcome without breaking everything. System Z has moved with and often ahead of the times, and long may it do so. Just for fun, here's a tongue-in-cheek comparison of where we started and where we're at. A fully configured ZEC12 is a formidable beast with 3 terabytes of memory and over 78,000 MIPS. A fully configured 36044 supported 128K and ran at about 0.09 MIPS. So what would it have taken to provide a server farm of 36044s to match the capacity of the EC12? Now my figures are rubbery and could be completely wrong, but this is just a bit of fun. At around 20 square meters, the equivalent area required for all System 36044 Model H's to equal the MIPS of a fully configured ZEC12 would be around 17 million square meters. For reference, Swaziland is just a bit smaller. It would weigh around 1.6 billion kilograms and produce about 6.12 kilocalories of heat per hour. It's hard to imagine the number of power stations it would require to supply this configuration. I also have a feeling that the amount of heat produced would require an exclusion zone of several kilometers to prevent burns. At the end of the day, and this presentation, despite how good the equipment was, or the software, and how much fun was had programming it or operating it, the real joy of my time with the mainframe has been the people with whom I shared the experiences. Their dedication, their partnerships, and their sense of humour and empathy are what defines what I've done and what I'll do in the future. So with this being the 50th anniversary of the mainframe, I hope IBM also realises that it's the people and not just its machines or Nobel Prizes that have made it what it is. That these same people love and do what they do and will put up with a lot in order to do it. But there are limits. The mainframe is a great technology, but it won't take much to resurrect the low point of 1991 in the interest of short-term gain. Its superiority in reliability and virtualization requires cultivation and not slash and burn in order to squeeze the last cent out of it.